So aloha keku, everyone. My name is Josiah Griffin. I am Native Hawaiian, and I am a program and policy specialist with the Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative. So as Elizabeth mentioned, I think that this may be our office's first time really joining you to share both what our work looks like and also some of the awesome things that we might be doing, that we are currently doing to build out a modified curriculum and to further the engagement of food safety in Indian country across the country. So the main things that we'll be talking about today, and I'm sorry that ended up bumping up a little bit, are a little bit about the Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative, where we are, why we exist, what we're doing relating to food safety trainings, information about what it looks like to work in Indian country at a very high level, what we're doing for a needs assessment as part of the cooperative agreement that we currently have with the Food and Drug Administration, as well as generally we'd open up for questions and answers, but we're going to be doing that at the end. So let's get started. So one of the first things that I often hear when I talk about where we're located, I say, hey, we're with the University of Arkansas. People come back and say, there aren't any federally recognized tribes in that state. Why are you there? So in 2013, Dean Leeds, Stacy Leeds, who is Cherokee, was the only Native American female dean of a law school anywhere in the nation. She was right there in Arkansas. As the co-founder, Janie Sims Hipp, was leaving USDA as the founder of the Office of Tribal Relations up in DC, advising the Secretary of Agriculture. She also had ties to the University of Arkansas's LLM, Masters of Law in Agriculture program, which is one of the first in the country as well. So melding these two brain trusts together became a perfect fit to be able to found our office and especially establish our work to enhance the health and wellness in tribal communities by advancing healthy food systems, diversifying economic development, and cultural food traditions in Indian country. So that work initially started with more of a policy and law slant, but as Dean Leeds became Vice Chancellor of Economic Development Leeds, we moved right along with her and built into the agri-food and agribusiness space as well. So looking broadly about our work, we say that we provide strategic legal analysis, policy research, and educational resources to empower Indian country through food sovereignty, agriculture, and economic development. The easiest way that I explain this, just at a quick level, is that you can think of us as something sort of like an agriculture, food, business, and policy think tank serving tribal nations across the country. We are based in a university, but we're run a little bit more like a nonprofit in some regards. So, looking specifically at our work, I've told you about what we do kind of at the broad scale, just kind of bringing it into what's relevant to this discussion here. So in 2016, the Food and Drug Administration identified and designated us as the Native American Tribal Center for Food Safety Outreach, Education, Training, and Technical Assistance. That is a very long name. I'm just going to call us the center. Not to be confused with any of the other centers, but just bear with me for that. So on our staff, we have a number of lawyers who have an extended history of working in both agriculture law and policy, as well as federal Indian law. I myself am not a lawyer, but I come with 5 years of working in USDA up in DC, so I bring in that policy background as well. So looking at that staff, though, we do have a combination of, so we have a combination of certified PSA trainers and lead PSA trainers. And so as we're looking at how we build into food safety training and outreach, we do that through a combination of mediums. So that includes face-to-face certification trainings currently using the Produce Safety Alliance curriculum. We also host webinars on a regular basis. So if you like hearing my voice for 7 minutes, you're gonna love hearing my voice for an hour on February 20th at 2 p.m. Central Time as we break down the Introduction to Food Safety Part 2. All of those are available and recorded at nativefoodsafety.org, so please feel free to check it out. But we also have a cooperation and collaboration that's intensive and ongoing with a number of tribal partners across the country, because we're a relatively small office and we can't do that without the help from our peers and collaborators, and I'll touch base on a few of those folks as I move forward. So as I said, I'm excited to say that we are developing a modified training curriculum based on the Produce Safety Alliance. So I'll touch on that a little bit more in the next few slides, but what we are currently doing with the Produce Safety Alliance curriculum training is we have gone across the country to host trainings for Native producers no matter where they're at. Generally speaking, we request that at least 10 Native producers come and join us just because it makes it a little bit easier to justify for our staff. But anywhere that you see a corn stalk is where we've currently done a training. There is room to improve, and we also have a request out for anyone who might be interested in hosting a training and receiving a training. So if you're aware in talking to your audiences of Native producers who might be interested in hearing with us, if you'd like us to collaborate with you, we're more than happy to do so. So specifically looking at what we are doing for the modified curriculum, it's important to identify as we're developing this curriculum that there is an intensive legal and cultural history of Indian country and working in food safety. Many of the foods that we attribute to international cultures that we enjoyed yesterday, like tomatoes and potatoes, we think of from Italy or from Ireland, but they originated in Native America. And so food safety concepts around those foods also originated in Native America in many regards. But the language and the way that we recognize and talk about that has shifted across post-colonization, and as this regulatory space has really taken a deeper dive as to what these definitions might mean and look like. And so one of the main things that we've recognized in developing this curriculum is that PSA already has a great baseline for what FSMA compliance is. So what we are trying to do is layer in and level in a recognition for what tribal sovereignty means, as well as some of the cultural aspects and ramifications that might be relevant to these discussions as we're talking about food safety, as we're talking about agricultural development, and as we're generally talking about the relationship to even just what food means. So I am excited that we are currently slated to begin rolling out that training and certifying trainers in 2020. That date is TBD, but more information to come there. So as we were talking about this, I've hinted at a little bit. Context matters, especially when you're working with tribes and when you're working with Indian country, because Native Americans, particularly when you're looking at tribal citizens, American Indians and Alaska Natives, are a political class. They're not just a minority group. And so they have a different level of kind of legal ramification or legal relevance to what the administration of laws mean. Also, it's a little bit different because, as I said, tribes hold sovereignty over their space, and they hold both civil and criminal jurisdiction over their territories. And so where you have state regulations, you might have a tribal regulation that bumps up against that. There are ramifications that result from that. It's important for us to be able to recognize that history of work and the legacy of the knowledge that they bring through traditional ecological knowledge, and that includes food safety. And so as we talk about these things, it's always important to bring it back to, yes, there is FSMA, yes, we have all of this conversation, but what does that mean for an Indigenous framework? And while many of the producers that we work with are either not covered or they have or are eligible for a qualified exemption, they are still selling to commercial markets that are expecting and requiring FSMA compliance. The other thing that's important to recognize as you're working in Indian country and with tribal citizens, Native Americans, is that we think of these designated land bases, but based on the 2012 census, we know that Native American producers are scattered across the country. So every single blue dot that you see there is at least 10 Native self-identified producers that meet the Census of Agriculture's definition for a farm, which, as you know, has a fairly low threshold with that $1,000 worth of agricultural sales across the year. So if anybody says that I don't think that there are tribal citizens or Native producers in my area, I challenge you to look at these maps, and I challenge you to look at the counties that you work with. But the nice thing that we know is while the tribal organizations that we've worked with, by and large, have said that the 2012 census was largely underrepresented or underrepresentative of Native production, the 2017 census is helping to show a bigger picture, a broader picture. Because what the 2017 data shows is that not only does about 1% of the population make up about 3% of the farms nationwide, but the number of Native producers is actually growing. And so this data, we feel, is a little bit better of a picture of what the landscape looks like, growing from 7% from 2012, with an increase of 24% in fruit and tree nut farming, 20% in beef and cattle ranching, 34% in sheep and goat farming. And particularly for what we do here, I find it striking that 20% increase is attributed to greenhouses, nurseries, and floriculture farming, which has massive FSMA ramifications. The other thing that we're talking about as we look at Indian country is, we think 1% of the population, 3% of farms. This is $3.5 billion worth of industry just based on Native agricultural production alone. So it's a growing space, and it's certainly worth talking about. So as we look at, it's helpful for us to frame what we do in national data, but it's also for us to get a baseline and benchmark what we do from what we're actually hearing from the people that we're working with. So as part of that 2016 cooperative agreement with FDA, we started issuing needs assessment surveys to identify where some of the gaps might be and what are some of the interest areas. So as we are looking at particularly what Native producers are saying that they want information on, that includes things like good agricultural practices at 75%, which is fairly massive. Good handling practices comes at a close second at 70%. The hazard analysis for controls comes at about 55%, and so on. 66%, no, 2/3, are still saying that they want general information on food safety training. So that really speaks to the importance of our ability to go out and reach these audiences for the PSA curriculum, for the modified curriculum, as well as just general engagement. As far as how they'd prefer to receive these educational materials, about 50% are saying printed copies. 55.03% say downloads from the website work. It's important to also recognize, though, that as you're looking at Indian country, many tribal lands especially are in rural areas that don't have consistent access to broadband. Most of the people that submitted for this needs assessment survey did so online, and so the data here may be a little bit skewed, but it's always important to be able to balance out how you get your word out to the communities that you're working with. So as we're looking at whether they'd be interested in participating in a webinar or a teleconference, we've got about a 40% interest rate for webinar. Teleconference is significantly lower, but when you allow both to merge and marry together, the interest is substantially higher, at about half. This is, I think, the most striking piece of data that we have, where all of the submissions for the needs assessment survey, out of that demographic, 95% have said that they would actually be interested in attending a food safety class within their region. And so not only did they say that they were interested in receiving general information on food safety, but they'd actually be willing to put some skin in the game and be there in person to join you. So for how long they'd prefer the trainings to be held, usually you're looking at a whole day. Online's a little bit more preferred as well, but there is also some interest for a half-day training, realizing that you might not be able to get as much information there. So as I said, we are one office. We can't do this on our own, and so we rely heavily on the Alternative Curriculum Working Group, including representatives from the Blackfeet Nation, the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, First Nations Development Institute, the Intertribal Agriculture Council, the University of Arizona FERTEP, which is the federally recognized tribal extension program. And we also rely heavily on direct input from Native producers. and people who have a history of working directly on the ground. So we'd also like to thank citizens from the United Nation of Wisconsin and the Sherwood Valley of Pomo Band of Pomo Indians. But beyond the alternative curriculum working group, we wouldn't be here today without the continued support, engagement, and the willingness to sit at the table by both the Food and Drug Administration and also the Agricultural Marketing Service at USDA. So we wholeheartedly like to thank both for continuing to come with us on this journey. So again, my name is Josiah Griffin. If you have any questions, I've got some business cards, but please feel free to send me an email at jwg012@uark.edu. I did not pick that email, the university did.